Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be able to join you for a little while this afternoon. Unfortunately, because of a rather busy schedule, which seems to be the way life is for archbishops, I haven't been able to spend the whole day with you, but I'm here for at least a little while to share some thoughts with you. I've been asked to give a couple of talks this afternoon, the first one on the Eucharist and the second one on Our Lady. It's quite appropriate that we should be doing this today because, as you know, tomorrow the feast of the solemnity of the most holy body and blood of the Lord, Corpus Christi, is celebrated. And it's the day when the Holy Father has invited the whole church around the world to join him in an act of adoration and praise, and there'll be a holy hour in the cathedral tomorrow afternoon from 3:30 to 4:30, where we'll unite ourselves in spirit with Pope Francis and with all of the churches scattered across the world who will be doing the same thing. St. John Bosco, the founder of the Salesian order to which I belong, began his work in northern Italy in the middle of the 19th century by gathering around him what we would today call street kids. He very quickly realised that the best thing he could offer them, apart from meeting their immediate needs for shelter, food and clothing, was a good education. So his work very quickly evolved to include schools of all kinds, which could provide young people with precisely that, a good education which would enable them to find their place in society, make a good living, and become what he called, in the very simple language he always used, honest citizens and good Christians. When St. John Bosco was still in the prime of his life and activity, he accepted into his school in Turin in northern Italy a young boy from one of the outlying country villages, whose name was Dominic Savio. This young boy came from a good, solid Catholic family, and under Don Bosco's guidance, quickly developed and matured into a classic example of what a young person of real faith looks like. Dominic was only at Don Bosco's school for a few years because, like so many young people at that time, he fell victim to a disease which today is under control, but in those days was very much a fatal disease. The disease was tuberculosis, TB. Just before he turned 16, Dominic died. And Don Bosco was so impressed by the quality of this young man that he wrote his life story and distributed it amongst the boys in the school. Slowly, Dominic became better known and his quality was recognised. And in 1954, which happens to be the year in which I was born, by the way, in 1954 he was canonised by the Pope and became the youngest person ever to become a saint in the Catholic Church, apart from those who had died a martyr's death. Just think back to when you were 15. Had you led a life that meant you could have been canonised had God called you home at that time? I thought I would start this reflection on the Eucharist this afternoon with this mention of Dominic Savio, because when he was a little boy, just on the verge of making his first Holy Communion, he made some promises. And one of them was this: Jesus and Mary will be my friends. Again, the language is very simple and childlike. But remember, Dominic was just a little boy at that time. But the idea contained in those simple words is anything but childish. In fact, it sums up very well the real heart of our Christian faith. God has created us in order to invite us into a relationship of very real and deep friendship. And he has made this known and made it possible by sending his Son, Jesus, who as a human being like all of us, has become someone with whom we can have a real and powerful friendship, if we want to. This is really the thing that makes our Christian faith so unique, because our faith dares to teach that God is not only the creator of the world, not only the one who, if you like, makes the rules or sets the boundaries, not only the one who can forgive us when we sin, and not only the one who will eventually call us home to heaven when we die. God is all of this, but God is much more. Because in our Christian faith, God is the one who offers us the gift of friendship, of closeness, of intimacy, of companionship, of love. And how does God do that? And this again is what makes our faith so unique. God does it by stepping into our human situation, by becoming one of us in Jesus, by saying to us that he wants to let us get to know him, and in knowing him, come to value his love and his presence in our lives. All this God does for us in his Son, Jesus. And it is this which no other religion dares to teach, that God has become so near to us. This is very important for us, and it's a theme that I often return to in my own homilies and talks, and also in my own reflection and prayer, because it's very easy to get religion wrong. We can look around the world. We probably don't have to look much further than our own society to realise how true that is. It is very easy for people to get religion wrong. For example, there are many people who think of religion only as a set of rules which are designed to control us and to limit our freedom. Other people who don't want to appear quite so negative in their thinking think of religion as a set of God-given guidelines to help us live our lives properly and avoid falling into all kinds of mistakes and disasters. And of course, that is one of the roles of religion. But first and foremost, as far as our Christian faith is concerned, religion is about an invitation to open our lives to friendship and love with God, to the friendship and the love God wants to offer us in and through the person of Jesus, which, if we open our lives to this wonderful gift, will make our lives richer and fuller than they will ever be without it. Not easier necessarily, not simpler, but richer and fuller. All of us, I think, know how important friendship is to us. Many of us know what it's like, or have known in the past, what it's like to be without friends, even perhaps if just for a little while. We've also all experienced how friends, and especially good and reliable friends, people that we might think of as amongst our best friends, give an extra dimension to our life. We know that when we are with our friends, we are able to forget about ourselves and our own struggles and difficulties, and in a sense be lifted out of ourselves. We can begin to relax. We can begin to enjoy life. We can begin to laugh. In other words, we begin to accept the gift of life which God has given us and live it to the full. But without friends, if we tried to struggle on alone, life can become very difficult. We can start to feel isolated, to feel lonely, and to find ourselves focusing more and more on our own difficulties and our own challenges. And we lose that sense of joy in life that God means us to have. People like St. Dominic Savio, and of course there are so many examples of this in the story of our faith and of our church, would tell us that developing and maintaining a friendship with Christ always brings with it, if it's genuine, these qualities of peace, of lightness of heart, the ability to enjoy life in the way God means us to enjoy life. What I want to suggest to all of you this afternoon is that Jesus does offer us this gift of friendship, and that this offer is most clearly seen and most deeply accepted in the gift of the Eucharist. Friendships can begin in all sorts of ways. Sometimes friendships just seem to develop naturally because of circumstances. Some of us here will have friends who go back to our childhood. Friends who are part of our lives perhaps simply because we grew up living next door to them. Friends who became friends because we shared a common interest. Often enough, our friendships develop at school, and for some lucky people, those friendships continue to grow and develop all through their lives. When it comes to our faith, our religion, friendship with God will grow and develop in much the same way. By being close, by familiarity, by recognising the presence of this Lord in our lives, just as we recognise the presence of those who live next door, or those with whom we went to school, or those with whom we work, or those even more closely who belong to our families. The celebration of the Eucharist and the gift of Christ himself to us in the Eucharist is at the heart of our Christian lives, because it's there that we get the chance to listen to and recognise this offer of the gift of friendship. But it's also when we celebrate the Eucharist and when we gather together in the presence of the Eucharistic Lord that we have the opportunity to respond. Jesus is offering us this gift of friendship, of closeness, of love, this gift of himself. And when we come to celebrate Mass, and when we come to adore the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament, we find ourselves in a position where we can say yes to this gift. Or, of course, sadly, we can say no to this gift. This was the experience of the two disciples of Jesus who were escaping from Jerusalem after the disaster of the passion and death of the Lord on the cross. Those two disciples were running away from Jerusalem because they were frightened that what had happened to Jesus might happen to them. We all know this famous story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. It's the story that Pope John Paul II used in one of his letters to the Church about the gift of the Eucharist. These two disciples are depressed and discouraged by the death of Jesus. And as I said, they're afraid that if they don't get away from Jerusalem, what happened to Jesus might happen to them. So they set out for the relative safety of the village of Emmaus. And on their journey, they're talking to each other about everything that has happened in these terrible days that have just been concluded. Jesus joins them, even though they don't recognise who he is. It's a reminder to us that Jesus might also often be walking with us in one way or another, and we don't recognise that he's with us. But he enters into a conversation with them and gradually helps them to understand the deeper meaning of things that had happened. And here too is another lesson for us, not to live on the surface, but to recognise that below the surface there are deeper meanings, deeper truths to the things that we experience. And then as they come towards the end of their journey, they ask him to stay with them. Stay with us, Lord. It is almost evening. They've had a sense of the importance of this person, although they don't know who he is, and they don't want to lose him. Stay with us. It's a prayer that we could often pray also. Stay with us, Lord. It's a prayer that we know the Lord will always answer. This experience of encountering Jesus, even though people don't understand quite who he is an experience that you'll find over and over again in the gospel story. Not everyone believed that Jesus was the Messiah. Not everyone believed or understood that he was the Son of God. But they still wanted to be with him. They still wanted to listen to him. Because somehow or other they knew that in his presence they were in the presence of God. The three of them, Jesus and the two disciples, go into the house. Maybe it's an inn where they're staying for the night, or maybe the home of some relatives. The gospel writer doesn't tell us. And they sit down for a meal. That, of course, is what you do with people that you care about. You sit down and eat with them. It's during the meal that Jesus does something which enables these men to recognise him when they hadn't recognised him before. He takes some bread and blesses it and breaks it into pieces and passes it to the disciples to eat. And as St. Luke, who is telling us the story, puts it, their eyes were opened and they recognised him. This too could become a prayer for us. Lord, open my eyes so that I might recognise you in all the ways in which you are present in my life. So they recognise the risen Jesus. But he can no longer be present to them as he had been before, because he has now passed through the experience of death. He's risen from the dead, and he has to return to his Father. And that's why St. Luke tells us that as soon as they recognised him, he vanished from their sight. It's almost as if they had once known him in a way that people that they lived with, they also knew. But now they have to learn to know him in a new way and have to learn to open their hearts and their lives to a different kind of presence of the Lord. The kind of presence that we now enjoy through the life of our church, through our sacraments, through our faith, and especially through the gift of the Eucharist. So Luke tells us that Jesus disappeared from their sight, but in another sense, he remained with them. Because when they recognised him in the breaking of the bread, What St. Luke is trying to help us understand is that we recognise and experience the presence of Jesus now in the broken bread of the Eucharist. Jesus is with us in the Eucharist now, and it's a much closer and more powerful and more intimate communion than even the people who lived with him experienced during his life. Just as the two disciples on the road to Emmaus recognised Jesus in the breaking of the bread, so we are invited to recognise Jesus as we do in the bread of the Eucharist. You all know, of course, that friends aren't just for looking at. Friendship is about more than just gazing at our friends. Friendship is about sharing things that matter. Friendship is about drawing strength from each other. Friendship is about opening the deepest parts of ourselves to our friends in the hope that they will listen, that they will understand, that they will support us, will accept us, will be there for us. Friendship is about entering into relationship. And this is where the wonder of the Eucharist as Christ's gift of himself to us comes in. Jesus didn't leave us some kind of static object as a sign of his ongoing presence with us, like some kind of monument. He didn't leave us an imposing tomb or a particular building or anything like that, or even a statue. He didn't leave us any of those things. He left us the sign of the Eucharist, the bread and the wine which become the body and blood of Christ with us and for us. And so, as we gather in the church this afternoon in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, we know that even as we gaze on him present in the Blessed Eucharist, our friendship with him must be more than that. The Church teaches us that the adoration of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament must always be connected to the celebration of the Eucharist, to the Mass. And we all know that in one way or another, the Mass is never complete until we've approached the altar and received the body and blood of the Lord into our lives, so that he and we become one together. It's not about Jesus over there and me here. It's about me here and Jesus loving me so much that he wants to come to me and live within me and grow within me. And why? So that in the words of St. Paul, I will have in me the same mind that was in Jesus. St. Augustine will tell us that when we receive the Eucharist, when we receive the body and blood of the Lord, we must become what we are. And what we are is what we become when Jesus unites himself with us. St. Paul will say to us, I no longer live. It is Christ who lives in me. When St. Augustine says to us, become what you are, he's really saying to us, become the Christ who lives within you, so that in and through you, Christ might touch the lives of others. This is what the Eucharist is for. This is why the Lord left us this wonderful gift, so that we might be in union with him, so that he and I might become one. But why? So that he, living in me, can touch those whom I touch, can speak to those to whom I speak, can care for those whom I care for. I no longer live, it is Christ who lives in me. I no longer speak, it is Christ who speaks in me. I no longer care, it is Christ who cares in me. I no longer love, it is Christ who loves in me. This is the uniqueness and the beauty and the wonder of our faith. Through the gift of the Eucharist and through the communion that we share with Christ through the Eucharist, we begin to become the presence of Christ. The early writers of the church, the people we call the fathers of the church, will say to us, we begin to share as a gift in what is Christ's by nature and by right. We begin to become divine because we are one with Jesus and Jesus is divine. So this is what we celebrate when we celebrate the Eucharist. This is what we do when we gather to adore the presence of the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. We recognise the extraordinary love of God for us, who calls us into a life of communion, of love, of friendship. Maybe we, like St. Dominic Savio, could take that simple statement and make it our own. Jesus and Mary will be my friends.